This is widely defined to include the human ecology of the prairie and energy and food. And it's really the place where sustainability initiatives kind of gravitate around in Grinnell College and in the community. He's developed something called the Grinnell Area Local Food Alliance, GALFA, and something called the Grinnell Area Petroleum Replacement Initiative, GAPI. He's very good at acronyms. And there's many people who grew up in the Fairfield community have gone to Grinnell. One who's here, Avi Pogel, who's become a leader here in our sustainability initiatives. So the next generation comes on. And I'd also like to appreciate John because he's really responsible for me having a teaching career. I don't know how, if you know what your kind words to me have been at certain times in my life. Thank you. And he supported me in my summer program and in giving me some teaching positions at Grinnell College, and I appreciate it very much. Thank you. So we're working to have more broader collaborations between Grinnell students and MUM students and faculty at Grinnell and other progressive colleges around the region. So we've got something called the, what's the acronym there, John?
I forgot.
It's the Iowa Colleges Sustainability Initiative, ICSI. And so we're still working on that one. And so without further ado, and John has, his wife is from Colombia, and he's had the good opportunity to spend some time with Paulo Ligari, the developer of Gaviotas Eco Village, and he's going to talk to us tonight. So let's give him a warm Fairfield welcome.
Thanks for being here tonight. But you know, despite the kind words that Lonnie used to introduce me, the truth is that I feel a little bit like an imposter coming to Fairfield to talk about sustainability, because from where I sit in Grinnell, whenever the word sustainability comes up, I think of Fairfield and MUM and Lonnie Gamble and the Sustainable Living Coalition. So you folks are way ahead of the curve and trendsetters, so keep it up. You're doing a fabulous job. Wanted to start with just a quick review of some of the big problems that we all know about, just to set the stage for what I see happening at Gaviotas. This is good? Yeah, okay. One of those big issues, of course, is human population growth. We're at the tip of the blue line there now, just past 7 billion last year, was it? Nobody's quite sure where we'll go from here. 3 options there: pessimistic, optimistic, and desperate. If you take a look at the population growth on a longer time frame, the last 10,000 years, this is how it looks. It represents an almost unbelievable uptick in that population line. We were doing pretty well as just one part of the global ecosystem. Too loud? No. We were doing pretty well as just one part of the global ecosystem for about 6,000 years, and then about 2,000 years ago we began to lose the balance, and you can see where it is today. You've all heard about the extinctions of the past. There have been 5 great periods of extinction in the Earth's history. The most dramatic one was at the end of the Permian, when almost half of the biological families of organisms became extinct. You can see the other 4 there that were lesser but still pretty dramatic. And coming back to today and to the human population growth, you can see in this graph the correlation between the recent human population growth and the incredibly steep ascent of extinctions. So much so that Elizabeth Colbert, as you probably know, has published a book called The Sixth Great Extinction. So we are currently in the midst of it. I got very depressed looking at this slide. Soil degradation around the world, as you can see. I actually have a pointer right there, and we're in the midst of in the middle of one of the areas of serious concern. Soil is the foundation. If we lose the soil, we really will be stuck. As you probably know, Iowa has lost half its topsoil in the last 150 years. It's a result of European-style farming. We also all know about the distribution of wealth in the world. I have to resort to glasses here to read the fine print. About 69% of the world's population controls about 3% of the wealth. On the other hand, 0.7% of the world's population controls 41% of the wealth. And a little over 8.5% of the world's population controls 82% of the wealth. If you've not gone onto the internet to see the Gini coefficient, G-I-N-I, I encourage you to do so and see what's happening to the Gini coefficient in different countries around the world. In some countries, it's getting better. In some, it's not too bad. In others, it's getting worse, and we are, in the United States, in one of the countries that's doing a little worse. The Hopi would, in thinking about all of these serious issues, perhaps invoke their word Koyaanisqatsi, life out of balance. How many of you have seen the film Koyaanisqatsi? Great. Those of you who haven't, I strongly encourage you to take a look at the film. It's a riveting, fascinating, and ultimately disturbing film. The Hopi ideal, a life in balance. And I think that's what we are all hoping to strive for here. Balance produces adaptability, resiliency, sustainable development, and persistence. The first use of the term sustainable development that I've been able to track down was 1972 classic book, The Limits to Growth. It was used but not defined. Generally, there's consensus that the first definition that made much of a splash of the term sustainable development came out of the Brundtland Report, 1987. Sustainable development is development that meets the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. Put it more succinctly, sustainability is the capacity to endure. One scholar put it, enough for all forever. Aristotle might simply have said, daimonia, human flourishing, as well as the flourishing of the larger global ecosystem. I'm sure you've heard people talk about the triple bottom line of sustainability: economic, environmental, and social. Some people like to call social equity sustainability, simply so they can talk about the 3 E's. Here's one way of conceptualizing their relationship. That's the sweet spot. That's where you can achieve all 3 forms of sustainability, certainly our goal. A different view of the triple bottom line, this one more like a bullseye. And something happened to my slide there in translation, I'm not sure. In the center should be economic sustainability. It is surrounded by the larger social context, society, and it in turn is surrounded by the larger environmental context. So 2 different ways to picture sustainability, and there are others. Those are probably the 2 most common. Very briefly, let's review what each of those suggests, starting with environmental sustainability. Here we want to maintain natural capital, including both source capacities and sink capacities. Source capacity is the environment's ability to continue to provide resources that we need. Sink capacity is the environment's ability to absorb, to assimilate the outputs and wastes of our activities. Another part of environmental sustainability would be protecting biodiversity, and a very important part is ensuring knowledge and appreciation of nature. Economic sustainability involves maintaining physical capital, tools, machines, means of transportation, all of the things that are used to produce and move goods and services. Also, as any business owner will tell you, income has to exceed expenses for the business to be economically sustainable. There has to be employment. That's a crucial feature of sustainability, good jobs for those who want work. Then I've added a couple of other points. One is caution about the idea of substitutability. Economists, mainstream economists, really like the idea of substitutability. You begin to run out of one resource, the price gets higher, you find a substitute for it. We began to run out of wood in England in the 17th century, and they found an alternative for coal, an alternative for wood in coal. Sustainability scholars have serious reservations about this idea of substitutability. To sustainability scholars, it tends to suggest problems rather than solutions, the way the economists tend to think of it. And finally, caution about the idea of growth. Mainstream economists, again, tend to advocate growth. The economy will only be successful if it's growing. And they have all kinds of measures of growth, GDP, GNP, the employment rate, and so on. Sustainability scholars, on the other hand, are more suspicious of growth. It is perhaps one of the things, in their view, that is causing the problems in the world, causing the lack of sustainability, causing Koyaanisqatsi. Finally, social or equity sustainability. Here we want to maintain human capital, the stock of education and skills, culture, knowledge, arts, that is part of the human condition and the human product of our amazing and wonderfully fertile minds. Social sustainability also suggests population continuity and stability. If you're in a situation like so many small towns in Iowa in which the population is falling, there's something not sustainable about those small towns. And we've seen many of them slide into virtual third world country status right here in Iowa. So we want population to be stable, we want population to persist, and maybe slight growth. Sustainability scholars aren't too keen on rapidly growing population. We also want social equity, both intergenerational and intragenerational. We desperately have to have an absence of corruption, crime, and war. Those factors make achieving sustainability almost impossible. And finally, well-being or happiness, a big part of what most scholars think of when they talk about social sustainability. How can sustainability be achieved? A lot of people advocate market solutions, cap and trade, things like that. The market will solve the problems and we will be able to use the market to achieve sustainability. I wonder how many of you have actually seen Adam Smith's original words. And by directing that industry in such a manner as its produce may be of the greatest value, he intends only his own gain. And he is in this, as in many other cases, led by an invisible hand to promote an end which was no part of his intention. Nor is it always the worse for the society that it was not part of it. By pursuing his own interest, he frequently promotes that of the society more effectually than when he really intends to promote it. Adam Smith, neoliberal economic theory, that's where it comes from, that idea of the invisible hand. More recently, a scholar critical of neoliberal economic theory has referred to the invisible foot, which stomps on people, stomps on the environment as a result of everybody pursuing their own individual self-interest. So market solutions is one possible way to go, in order to identify and claim sustainability. Another place that a lot of people turn to is government policy, and government regulations to help us try to achieve sustainability. That one got moved around too, my apologies. Here's a list of major environmental legislation starting in 1960 with the Air Quality Act, going up to 1996, Safe Drinking Water Act amendments. You'll notice there isn't anything on this chart after 1996. We really haven't had much effective, worth mentioning environmental legislation. And needless to say, the federal government today seems pretty well locked into inaction and incapacity. Nevertheless, many people are hoping that the government will be the ones leading the way to sustainability. The third way to move us towards sustainability would be through NGOs, grassroots organizations, and community-based solutions. Just a couple of examples on the slide. The Sierra Club, one of the oldest efforts in that direction, the Iowa Environmental Council, grassroots protesters, the villages of Crest Mountain, a sustainable community trying to achieve sustainability in North Carolina. This is where my talk focuses on NGO, grassroots, and community-based solutions. I am not particularly optimistic about the first two, about market solutions or government solutions, at least at this point. So I'm putting my hopes into this third area, which will involve three more E's: ethics, education, and empowerment, and a C, consciousness. Which brings me to my example for this evening, the Gaviotas community in Colombia. You can see its location. It's in the vast grasslands to the east of the Colombian Andes. You can see a couple of actually there are three different mountain range chains of the Andes here. And the area to the east is known as the Llanos. The arrow indicates the location of Gaviotas. The Llanos basically means a savanna. It's a very extensive grassland. It's a little bit bigger than Texas. A very impressive part of the country, but to people who live in the mountains, it's a little bleak, a little forbidding. It's got a very pronounced rainy season and dry season. The rainy season lasts from April to October, and the dry season is the rest of the year. But during that rainy season, they get about 100 inches of rain each year. Knowing that I'm in Fairfield, I'm pretty confident that a lot of you know how many inches of rain we get here. Who can tell me? 35, 37 inches of rain, yeah. So the Llanos, although it's got a very pronounced dry season, gets almost 3 times as much rain as Iowa. During the dry season, very strong winds blow out of the Andes. The soils are relatively poor. Significant reduction of biodiversity recently as agriculture has spread into the Llanos. It's one of the last agricultural frontiers in the world. There's still room for more expansion of agriculture, but both cattle and cash cropping are causing the same kinds of problems that agriculture has caused in Iowa in terms of biodiversity reduction. Fairly recently, petroleum exploration has begun there, which is causing the kinds of problems that you can imagine. The Llanos has also been an area of guerrilla activity in Colombia. It subsided a little bit in the last 10 years or so, but it's still there. Colombia went through a terribly difficult time politically in the 1970s, 80s, and 90s. FARC and other guerrilla groups were pretty much running parts of the country. My wife, as Lonnie said, was born in Colombia, but when she was 12 years old, her father farmed out in the Llanos. When she was 12 years old, he came home one day and said, "We're leaving." And the reason was that the children of landowners in Colombia, in the Llanos in particular, were very subject to kidnapping and being held for ransom. So family moved to Costa Rica and he began farming there, a different kind of farming, a different environment. And also going along with the guerrilla activity has been narco-trafficking, the drug trade, of course, being a big part of Colombian economy. And there's the man himself, the founder of Gaviotas. I had the opportunity when we took a family vacation to Colombia a couple of years ago to visit Gaviotas, and I grabbed it. I'd been hearing about the place for, well, at that point, about 14 years, ever since Alan Weissman published a book called Gaviotas, A Village to Reinvent the World, excuse me. And I had actually taught that book in a class, and then one day my wife saw me reading the book, and she said, "Oh, Gaviotas. My father knows Lugari." I said, "Really?" Great, okay. So then a couple of years after that, we decided to take a trip to Colombia to celebrate her 50th birthday, and she wanted to visit the Llanos where she had grown up, and I said, "Hey, how about throwing in a little side trip to Gaviotas?" And she was all for that. So we got to go there. There may be somebody in the audience who's spent more time in Gaviotas than I actually have. I was there, but only for a day, and then we had Lugari, in effect, at our disposal for that entire day, and I interviewed him for about 14 hours in between lunch and seeing things. And then we met him again later that same week in Bogota and continued the interview. So that's the basis for what I have to say tonight about Gaviotas. I have not stayed there long. In fact, he said we should not stay overnight. It was too dangerous because of the guerrilla activity that still exists in the area. The way he put it, actually, was, and my wife is the daughter of German immigrants, he said, "Looking the way you do, it wouldn't be safe." I'm not going to go through Paulo Lugari's entire biography. You can read about it in Alan Weissman's book, Gaviotas. Let me turn instead to his critique of conventional economic development in the third world. For one thing, he said, it creates too much wealth and too much poverty. Conventional economic development tends to create an enriched class or enrich an already wealthy class, and at the same time it creates poverty. You might want to say that it's relative poverty, poverty relative to the increasingly wealthy part of the population, but that still counts as poverty, as anybody who's familiar with third world urban growth can attest. He said it promotes excessively materialistic values, and this isn't good for us as a species. It's not good for the future. Fosters too rapid population growth, propels hyper-urbanization. As you probably know, Bogota has over 10 million people now, the vast majority of whom live in very, very poor conditions. And Lugari was familiar, certainly firsthand, with that. He considers cities also to be very inefficient ways of organizing human society and prone to crime. Conventional economic theory relies on agriculture, but agriculture done in the industrial mode. high chemical use, high fossil fuel input, large machinery, getting rid of labor where it's possible to displace labor with machines, and generally polluting the world. Creates too much environmental destruction, and all of these problems, he feels, are worse in the third world. So Lugari's goal for Gaviotas, which he began in the early 1970s, this is a direct quote, was to create a sustainable community in the third world tropics using principles and techniques appropriate to the third world. The environmentalist Paul Hawken visited Gaviotas, I think about 8 or 10 years ago now, and his summary assessment of the place was, after looking around at the Llanos, seeing all of the challenges, all of the problems, Paul Hawken said, if it can be done here, it can be done anywhere. That was his assessment. So, as I said, we took advantage of an opportunity to visit. We chartered a little plane. Gaviotas has its own landing strip because that's how people get back and forth to Bogota. Flying over the area, we could see the sluggish Llaneran rivers. This is the River Meta. Very wide. You can see all the sandbanks. Clearly, this is during the dry season. During the rainy season, that would be completely full and overflowing its banks. In fact, we couldn't have visited Gaviotas in the rainy season. It would have been impossible to get there. We also flew over industrial-style agriculture in the Llanos, as I mentioned. Las Gaviotas means the gulls. This is the logo that they have created for themselves. Orinoquia refers to the general Orinoco watershed. Probably heard of the Orinoco River. Just a few pictures of the setting in Gaviotas. We'll come back into this building in a minute. Walking around the community, ordinary homes, some interesting, unusual buildings. That one was a solar collector on the roof. School. And let me also mention that there is a facility in Bogota that Gaviotas owns also. Lugari has an office there, but he spends about half his time nowadays in Gaviotas and the other half of his time in Bogota. Well, I told you how long I was with him. He loved to talk. And as a good anthropologist, I love to listen, and I did a lot of listening. And my Spanish is más o menos, but my wife's Spanish is flawless, of course, and so she filled in whenever I didn't quite get it. So what I want to address this evening is the question, how well is Gaviotas doing 40 years out in Lugari's goal of achieving sustainability? And I'm going to break it down into the triple bottom line of sustainability: economic sustainability, social sustainability, and environmental sustainability, in that order. I asked Lugari, because it wasn't quite clear from Weissman's book, how the community was organized economically. And somewhat to my surprise, he said, well, it's organized as a nonprofit foundation. And that explains a lot about Gaviotas. However, unlike a lot of nonprofit foundations, it accepts no grants or donations. I found that out when, at the end of the day, I said, gee, this is really great and impressive. I'd like to make a donation to the Gaviotas effort. And he said, we don't accept donations. I was amazed at that. So how do they keep this whole thing going? How have they kept it going for 40 years with no donations? He did correct it. He said, well, right at the beginning, we got a grant from the United Nations to help start up. But if we were talking about the entire budget being $100 or 100 pesos, he said, the United Nations grant represented 1 peso. So it was really small. It did help, but it wasn't the main driver of our beginnings. But since then, they have not been accepting any donations or grants. Nevertheless, they pay all of the people who live there and work there, pay them very decent salaries. Ugadi's impression was that they're the best salaries in rural Colombia next to the petrochemical industry. Well, and probably next to the narco-trafficking effort. So, how does Gaviotas survive economically? One of its earliest industries was photovoltaics. They built themselves a factory and started manufacturing photovoltaic arrays that initially were used for solar water heaters. Some of the slides are pictures that I took during the visit. Some are pictures that Paolo Ugadi provided us as part of the talk he had given, and that's why they're numbered. You'll see that sometimes the English isn't quite right. So all of the water that used at Gaviotas, the hot water used at Gaviotas, was heated by their photovoltaics, and this goes back to the early mid-1970s. They also sold solar heating panels in various cities in Colombia. This one in Medellin, a neighborhood housing development. You can see all of the homes there have photovoltaic panels manufactured in Gaviotas. I think Cali has one, and many of the government buildings in Bogota have photovoltaics manufactured in Gaviotas. Another early project was planting Caribbean pines. These pines are not native to that area. I'll say a little more about that fact later. But here's early on some of the Gavioteros planting these pine seedlings and thinning them and harvesting seedlings for transplant. In other places, a lot of back-breaking labor, but eventually they were able to afford more mechanized ways of planting these trees. And it's resulted in a pine plantation. They have now planted 8,000 hectares of Caribbean pine, whose rosin they tap. Of course, it's a renewable resource. And the rosin is processed in this facility at Gaviotas, which we saw in operation. And hot rosin is loaded into these cardboard boxes using recycled cardboard. And it's shipped to Bogota, where it's used in the paint industry, important component of paints. Another product from the pines is pine oil, used for a variety of purposes as a lubricant.